Okay, thank you. So I'm Asher Rospigliosi from Brighton Business School, and I want to talk a little bit about what we might think of as potential futures for marketing in relation to technology. So I rather pretentiously suggested a title of Marketing 3.0 as a way of differentiating this from just talking about what already exists. So I'm going to think a bit about big data and how that affects customer relationship management, a little bit about mobile, and a little bit about forecasting and the difficulties that we might have with that. So big data is a term used very widely, not just in the field of marketing, but in lots of areas where we're recognizing how the changes in the way that we capture transactions particularly means that I've got a little echo. Is that a problem? I don't know. The way that we capture data is impacted by technology, and that's... Yeah. Can you turn it down a bit there? Oh, thank you, yeah. So I'm going to look at some of the ways that the changes in technology has had an impact on the kind of data we had. So a brief, very brief history of the development of a range of technologies. For example, the acceleration of science research and its relationship with printing. So we're seeing the number of journal articles. This is a research paper from 1965 showing the number of publications that are being made in various fields of science research accelerating very rapidly around the time of the Second World War, and from the Second World War on. The sort of globalization of science that took place after the Second World War, the space race, so the development of spaceship technology in Russia and America, and since the late 1960s, the internet have all meant that we're capturing and sharing data more rapidly in the field of science. And then in the field of business, we've seen the growth of databases as a way of recording our transactions. So commercial databases for capturing financial transactions, stock transactions, personnel transactions have been used widely in business since the early 1970s. So we've got sort of 40 years of data building up on what companies are doing. Since the early 1990s, we've seen the growth of supply chain systems. So things like electronic point of sale, EPOS, and radio frequency ID tags to allow us to monitor where things are in the supply chain and when they're sold and what the stock levels are. All quite mundane transactional data, but if we have years worth of it, we begin to build a very rich picture, well, rich, a detailed picture of transactions. And then since the mid-1990s, late 1990s, we've seen the growth of data mining. So these aggregated databases being available for interrogation by those who are trying to do business. So asking questions of the patterns of what our consumers have bought or what our business transactions have been. So data mining is a technology that allows us to analyze the captured data from these other systems. Data warehouses allow us to build specialized views, so we might want to look at particular types of transactions or particular types of customers. And behind all this, we've been using, behind all this, as a source of data for this, we've had customer loyalty schemes, so cards that allow the shop, or the retailer, to identify who it is who's making the purchase and link that to patterns like demographic or other behavioral and social and cultural data that we might have available to us. In the finance field, we've had increasing growth of electronic transactions. So most, in the UK at any rate, most transactions are not done with physical money, but are done with electronic debit and credit cards and things like that. And about 18 months ago, Roland Ford, who is the Chief Information Officer of Walmart, said in an interview, "Every day I wake up and I ask, how can I flow data better, manage data better, analyze data better?" So retailers are realizing that they've got a huge amount of detail about who's doing what. They have about 1 million customer transactions every hour in the Walmart business empire. So that's one field in which big data is being increasingly generated and used. Another, just a very simple count, is looking at the amount of data that is moving around on the internet. So looking at the number of domains like google.com or websites that are registered. In 1994, very few. If we look in the last couple of years, there's an increasingly accelerating rate of new websites being created, new internet domains being created, which would be indicative of far more data being created. Then we've got the use of user-generated content, which I looked at yesterday. Lots of different ways of measuring it, but undoubtedly that is accelerating the amount of electronic records created about what people are doing, what they feel about what they're doing, what they want to share about what they're doing. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a proliferation of mobile phones. So we've got mobile data that allows us not only to have the internet transaction data that we get from web browsers and websites, but also location information, so where the people are as they are connected to the internet. In 2011, the number of connections to the internet done by mobile cellular has outpaced any other. So that this is the number of people using the internet according to the World Telecommunication ITU. This is the number of people using the internet. This is the number of mobile connections to the internet. And this pale blue line, this is the number of connections into people's homes and offices, the conventional connection to a computer that we, until a couple of years ago, thought of the way that we would measure the internet. So we've got growth of mobile and static internet, and then we've got the Internet of Things, sometimes known as the Internet of Everything. A guy called Gershenfeld coined or created the concept in 2004 to describe things that are connected to the internet that are not being actively managed and used by a person. So I don't know if it is, but conceivably this could be a device that would move the PowerPoint on using an internet connection. I don't think it probably does. The data projector up here could conceivably have its own internet address and carry the image from the PC via the internet. I don't think either of those are actual internet-enabled devices, but there are more and more physical objects that carry internet data from them. So within our own homes, most of us are likely to have a router that sits somewhere, which is separate from the iPad, the laptop, and the mobile phone, all using a Wi-Fi connection. So in many modern households, you might have 5 or 6 different devices connected to the internet, some of which you sit at and use, and others, like the router, are just a gateway or a hub. We're also seeing a growth of devices connected to the internet for monitoring transactions. So you can buy things like a refrigerator, a washing machine, that might have an internet connection in it that would allow you to choose to turn it on when you're on your way home via a remote control driven from your iPhone. We're seeing lots and lots of sensors connected to the internet, so things like CCTV systems, location monitoring systems. In big warehouses and offices, there'll be devices connected to the internet that would allow those who need to know, or those who want to know, to establish where employees are within a warehouse. So companies like Walmart might well monitor the movement of employees around the warehouse. Amazon use it as a way to optimize in a commercial way the way that their employees move around the warehouse picking goods to pack them and to monitor it. I mentioned radio frequency ID, so most large shipping containers, pallets, ways of moving goods around the supply chain will have an internet connection. And GPS global positioning systems will often be internet enabled as well, so that things like the movement of cars around a city can be monitored as a source of internet data. Mobile phones, of course, are all connected, well, not all, but many smartphones are connected to the internet. There are tools like pacemakers, so health devices, a pacemaker for the heart and other health devices might send a monitoring stream of data back to a hospital or a medical centre that would allow the medical centre to be aware of the condition of the patient wherever they were. In security, we have things like prisoner release schemes that allow felons to be released from prison but monitored for their location. Smart meters that allow things like the consumption of electricity and other utilities, electricity and gas, to be monitored and connected to the internet, and many new vehicles will have an internet-enabled connection. This Internet of Things means that we're getting a very rich picture of human activity. I use the term crowdsourcing rather loosely there, as a way of understanding what's going on. So, for example, TomTom, who make GPS devices, offer a premium service that allows someone who's driving through a city to know where there is congestion, where the traffic is moving slowly, and the data that is the source of that is other TomTom devices. So TomTom can monitor how cars are moving around the city because they're all sharing information via the internet, and then sell that back to the user for a premium price to tell them where traffic moves slowly. I won't talk through each of these, but oil exploration increasingly is done in remote areas by internet-enabled devices. They throw seismic monitors out of helicopters over kilometers of wasteland or empty, barren land, and then use that as a way of sending back signals if there's oil to be drilled for. In the UK, in London, Thames Water, who manage the flood barriers and sewage release schemes in London, they all have internet-enabled gateways so that someone doesn't have to go and open a sluice. There's monitors that say what the water level is at and then open and close it down. I put Twitter in here because in some respects the use of Twitter is like a crowdsourced Internet of Things, in that although individuals are choosing to send messages, things like the location they're in and the time that they send the message is rich metadata that would allow us to, to understand where people are going and what people are doing aside from their own interventions. There are lots of apps that allow people to do life tracking, so to monitor how many hours a night they sleep, or how much coffee they drink, or how much exercise they do, how many miles they walk in a day. There's this sort of term, the quantified self, a lifestyle choice that some people do, all of which is creating rich additional data. Although it's not the Internet of Things, I also think that there's quite a lot of interest in research in the way that images created and shared by services like Flickr or Twitter or Instagram allow us to map the world and know things that are going on beyond what the user is consciously sharing. This is a slide taken from a white paper by a consulting group, so it's not an academic source, but it's trying to map out how the Internet of Things is developing. So early in the 2000s, there was a sort of tagging of goods, particularly for logistics. The early adopters were of remote sensing devices, or people wanting to ship goods around the world. We're seeing growth in surveillance, security, healthcare, document management, where things are in the office and in the business. We're beginning to see the location of people and everyday objects, so something like Foursquare or Facebook Places would allow us to say which bar are my friends in and go and join them, or where are people if I'm looking for them. And on the horizon is teleoperation and telepresence. So instead of sending an engineer to fix something, having an internet-enabled set of robotic tools or self-diagnostic and mending tools, and sort of software agents and advanced sensor fusion. On the horizon are things where the internet will manage the the internet can be used to manage the physical world without people being there. In terms of sort of a description of the characteristics of big data, which I think is what the last few slides have helped us to see is being generated by a range of different types of activities. Sometimes it's described as having 3 V's as characteristics. One is just volume. There's more of it, that's why it's big. And the way we measure it and the scale that we would think about it has to take account of it being in greater quantity, not very interesting. But velocity is an interesting characteristic. So some of the early slides I talked about printing and scientific articles, and the lead time between someone writing an article and it being in press and then it being in our libraries is a year or two. With something like a database for stock management, we typically see something like batch systems that overnight would update stock levels. But we're seeing the velocity increase in the last 10, 15 years. We're seeing near real time and then real time creation and usage of big data. So big data isn't just that there's more of it in a database, but that we're able to access it as it's being created and use it as a resource in real time. And then the third V in this description of big data is that it's more varied. So written or database tables, reports from databases are highly structured and predictable. They have columns of numbers and words. But in the growth of the internet data, we're seeing audio, video, and photos being shared. And increasingly, we're seeing individual users creating things like social connections that would allow us to do things like anticipate demand generation, but mobile data, marketing automation. The variety of the kinds of data that we might have access to is growing as well. This is a slide taken from The Economist just to give us a sense of the size of these items of data. So most computers and phones that we might use would measure the kinds of units of data held in them in megabytes and gigabytes. Typical PC might have a few gigabytes of storage space, a few thousand gigabytes even. In terms of the commercial storage of data, we're beginning to see companies that need to think in terms of terabytes or petabytes. And exabytes and zettabytes are on the horizon. They're almost too big to imagine, but the acceleration of data means that we are going to be storing and needing to think about the storage and use of data sets on that scale. How is big data affecting the way that we think about what we do? Well, I thought this editorial from Management Information Quarterly gave some quite good ways of separating out the historical evolution of big data from the sort of database managed systems through what we're currently experiencing, which is web-based. They call it business intelligence and analytics 2.0, the sort of social media data that we're seeing, lots of web-based and unstructured. And what organizations are only just beginning to understand is of potential business value is mobile and sensor-based data, so that's sort of business intelligence 3. And the article set out 5 areas where it might be applied, so things like safety and public security and safety, health, science and technology, and government. But the area that I'm most able to say anything about is to do with e-commerce and market intelligence, so how it's used as a sort of way of understanding what's going on in business. And they identified 5 areas of emerging research that are perhaps useful if we want to think about what is it that we would want to have developed capabilities in if we're going to be able to use big data. So there's data analytics, but also text analytics. So being able to understand the meaning that can be drawn from very large quantities of tweets or web blogs, and looking at sentiment analysis, for example, as a way of understanding whether people are liking a brand message or liking a piece of content or responding negatively to it. So that's text analytics. Then we have web analytics, so the understanding of movement of traffic around the web, so web logs that capture which web pages are requested and how many seconds a user spends on a page before they click to the next page, gives us a rich area to analyze to understand what our users are doing. There's network analytics, the connections between people. So I talked a bit about this towards the end of yesterday's lecture, social network analysis and understanding patterns of connections between users, and mobile analytics, so the data that we might draw on from the use of mobile phones, so the location information, the linking together of things like people's contact lists, which gives us a network insight, with their use of websites, all in a location and a time, with location added, I guess mobile analytics adds specifically. Okay, so that's one sort of chunk of content I wanted to think about, which is big data. Any questions or comments before I plow on?
I have a couple of comments and questions.
Yeah. Yes, please.
First thing to the acceleration thing that you said, everything gets quicker and this kind of transformation to real time. Just have 3 authors from sociology that I could suggest.
Yeah.
Something related with it is what you take a critical perspective on real time, this development to real time. There's a German sociologist called Hartmut Rosa, like R-O-S-A. Then there's two French writers. One is called Virio. He doesn't do it to the internet, Virio.
Okay.
There's Jean Boudrillard, who does it with the question of real time.
Okay.
They discuss all the problems that might come along with this kind of like interacting in real time. Just,
yeah.
You know.
Okay, yes. Not necessarily from an internet perspective, but just a...
The others is from an internet perspective.
Right.
I think Hartmut Rosa also touches it from an internet perspective, at least at some points. Another question that I have, that's just a question of curiosity. You said that the yottabyte is difficult to imagine. I can't imagine a zettabyte as well.
Yeah.
What is meant by this? Why that it's difficult to currently too big to imagine? Because I mean, I can't imagine a petabyte. I might be able to imagine a terabyte because this is my hard drive.
Yeah. Okay. So this slide probably is it legible? Can you read what it says on here from there? Yeah. So I mean, the idea of a petabyte, while it's difficult to imagine all the letters being delivered in America, I think it is a conceptual model that one could say a petabyte having all the letters delivered in 1 year. If one thinks about the vans driving around a city, one could get some kind of mental picture of that.
Okay, you relate it to a concrete object?
Yeah.
That you know how to imagine it more or less?
Yes, I think that might be one way of... I have also seen, I think a petabyte is about equivalent to Google's transactions in 1 month, or it might be 1 week. So all the searches and archiving of websites and everything in one, that also is a more virtual...
Now I understand what is meant by it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what is meant by it because as I said, it's zettabyte, I don't know how to imagine a zettabyte of data.
Right, yeah, so it's giving it...
Related to a concrete object.
Related to a concrete object or a data structure that has some meaning. All the books ever written or something.
To text analytics.
Yes.
I have a question. What methods you're talking about there? Is it like semiotics? Or is it more like discourse analysis?
It's probably nearer to discourse analysis and semiotics, but not as subtle as discourse analysis. It would be a lexical count. So you would... It's like content analysis, yeah. And as currently practiced, sentiment analysis tends to be a pretty crude count. So you might say something like, search through Twitter feeds for a brand like Coca-Cola, and then within 3 words before or after the brand is mentioned, look for an emotive word, and there'd be a list like good and bad and like and dislike and, you know, love and hate. And there would be little capacity to make a contextualized analysis. So, you know, if somebody said, I can't think of an example, but if somebody said something ironic, for example, the analysis would not be useful for that, or it would not be able to identify that. But as a...
For example, wow, how fantastic, Coca-Cola raises the prices.
Yeah, exactly. They would say that was a positive sentiment. Yeah, our customers are happy. Exactly. But there was an article I mentioned yesterday to do with sentiment analysis of tweets from people on the first day that a blockbuster movie was released in the US. And historically, for the last few years, the US film distribution market has counted the number of people that go and see a film in its first weekend of release and use that to anticipate whether it's going to be a popular movie or not. And this article, I'm afraid I can't remember the reference, but the sentiment analysis, whether people came out from the film and said it was great or it was crap, was a more accurate predictor of how many people would buy it on DVD 6 months later, how popular, how successful the movie was commercially. So there are ways in which sentiment analysis does seem to be, as a fairly crude measure, useful. Yeah. Thank you. No, it's useful, and I might have to. I apologise. The English are very bad at European languages, and I was only able to capture one author of the 3 you mentioned. I might send you an email asking for the 2 French authors. Okay, so the idea of one way that we might use big data is in understanding our customers more closely, so from a commercial sense. And customer relationship management is a set of tools that have been developed that allow organizations to try and work more closely with their customers. So I've got 4 or 5 slides about customer relationship management. Is that shall I go ahead and talk about that? I'm happy to skip on to mobile if CRM sounds too business oriented, because your interest is journalistic and your interest is philosophical or a range of different?
No, I'm fine with journalistic as well.
Yeah? Okay, so but CRM is not journalism, it's just selling stuff. So I feel inclined to skip this.
I have heard about this concept
Yeah.
in my school. But because in my school there are public relations and marketing as well.
Yes, and
Related with marketing.
it's related with marketing, absolutely, yes. And this is just a sort of pragmatic description of how CRM might be used to improve websites. I feel inclined not to talk through it and go straight to forecast in the future because I'm lazy and I think it's a bit businessy. So you'll have to say, I want CRM if you want it.
I don't know whether I talk for you, but I mean, despite that, what you're going into now, I would really to hear you the stuff on social media that you have.
So sorry, say that again?
The stuff on the social web that you have.
Ye-
Really interested in that.
Okay, now the social is what I talked yesterday.
Ah, that's the 4?
Yeah, 4 is yesterday.
It's yesterday.
It's yesterday. I did warn you yesterday. I did say some time yesterday, I'm going to use some of this again. And so I'm certainly not going to talk that through again. And please, either of you, if what you're hearing ceases to be useful, do tell me, because this is a very artificial kind. I stand here with a microphone, you know, it's a bit weird to me, but we'll give it a go. So I wanted to think a little bit. The trajectory I had in mind for this talk is, where is this stuff going? That is, the use of technology in the relation to marketing. So I wanted to look a little bit at forecasting, just 3 or 4 slides, some thoughts on how that is useful or not, as a before going on to look at the impact of mobile on marketing, which is the other bit I want to talk about. So, this is largely drawn from a very old book from 1981, Global Talk by... I don't know what happened there. Yeah. Global Talk by Pelton. And to give a sort of, this is only just a couple of slides before I go into the social media, but I wanted to give some examples from Pelton of how difficult forecasting is and how, so these are just anecdotal examples, quotes that are not attributed, but for example, in the late Victorian era, an author saying that the telephone will never be in use in England because there are so many telegram delivery boys. Why would you need a telephone at home when there is always a boy on a bicycle who will deliver the message? And in terms of environmental predictions, fears that the amount of horse manure that is deposited on the streets of Britain, again, this probably would have been about 100 years ago, being the most important environmental risk to the world. And from the 1950s, I believe this is from a IBM source, saying the size of the market for business computers will never be very large, because to do all the business we need to do in the USA, we'd only need 5, and 2 would be enough for the United Kingdom. So, but it is important to try and identify or try and have some sense of what the technologies that we are using may be able to do in the future and how they may be used, both from the point of view of the commercial point of view of being able to invest suitably, to see what developments are useful, to have some sense of time scales, to be ready for opportunities, and to allocate resources. So if, for example, mobile is something that consumers are going to use in all kinds of ways increasingly, does seem the case, then being able to identify that and recognise the importance will make it likely that we'll develop mobile strategies. And I just wanted to look at the tablet, the iPad, as a sort of, in terms of a technology trajectory. Much of the physical technology that the iPad is made up of goes back to the early 1960s, drawing on research in semiconductors over 100 years ago. We've had portable computers with colour touch screens since the early 1990s, so in specialised market segments, things like stock management systems, employees have had touchscreen computers for more than 20 years. And as a product available to consumers, they've been around since, well, even before the 2000s. There was things like the Apple Newton in the late 1990s. When the iPad was released, which I should have put iPad 1 on there, which was 2000, April, yeah. When the iPad was released in 2010, a lot of technology correspondents, journalists, content creators, were sceptical about the value of it. We were in 2010, the lightweight laptop, the netbook, was very in vogue, and people were, and the iPhone had recently been developed, and the growth of touchscreen phones was accelerating. A lot of people thought that the iPad was a product without a market, and yet 1 year ago in the UK, in Christmas, one iPad sold every second in the United Kingdom. And in terms of the impact of things like e-commerce and mobile commerce, the iPad has broadened the reach of who is using the internet considerably. So many people who did not use full computers and for whom the mobile phone is too small, like older people, for example, may be using the iPad to access online services and interact with products and things. So that just a little bit of thought on forecasting before going on to mobile marketing. So when I think about mobile marketing, I'm an older man. Come back. Where's my computer gone? When I was a child, on television, he was the coolest guy. He had the best technology. He walked onto the surface of a new planet, and he could look at his screen and he could say, there's air here, there's life here, there's dilithium crystals that we can use to restock the fuel supply of the Starship Enterprise. And he travelled around in a spaceship, and in my mind, and I think for many people, that was some distant future. One day people would travel around in spaceships, they would meet aliens, and they would carry a computer this size that was powerful. When we try to forecast the future, I wonder if I can get YouTube. No, I won't put the video clip. This is a nice short video produced by the British Post Office. So that's a nationalised industry in the was a nationalised organisation in the UK that managed the telephone lines and manage now our mobile networks. In 1969, they tried to anticipate some of the ways that telecommunications could be used in the 1990s. So this was a film made in 1969 saying what will computers and phones do in the 1990s. And this is it's like Skype. It's a video conferencing using coaxial cables which would allow it to connect to the telecommunication network. This is the interface. So in the film we see here the man talking to someone in Australia and pushing these buttons to start and stop the call. Everything is made of sort of wood. It looks like nice furniture. It doesn't look like this or your nice Apple laptop. But it's actually quite an accurate prediction. It's very similar to the kind of technology we got within about 10 years. So as a forecast, it was pretty good. So I want to think a bit about what's happening with mobile and the different technologies that are coming together. So I've got this is sort of the outline of how I'm going to talk about mobile, the evolution, convergence and evolution, some of the benefits for the customers, the impact of location, then Google talking about the benefits to marketing, look a little bit at trust and privacy concerns. I don't think I talk about ubiquity. So we're seeing convergence of technologies. The smartphone and the tablet both provide us with a similar sort of interface that allows us access to the internet. And we've got things like Google Goggles coming, or Google Glass, rather, watches that are internet connected, wearable and ubiquitous computing is on the horizon. In the home we have things like televisions that are connected to the internet, set-top boxes that allow us to draw on our broadband connection to watch streaming television, and gaming consoles, things like the PlayStation and the Xbox, all connecting the consumer to the internet away from using a computer. And we're seeing a very rapid evolution of the technologies that are used. So SMS was only created less than 20 years ago and has become it's one of the highest in terms of number of communications shared around the planet. SMS has become the most highest number. We had something like the wireless application protocol that was developed to allow mobile phones to show web pages in about 1998, 2000, already hopelessly out of date, but for a little while there. In the last sort of 5 years or so, Flash and Java have been the ways that we've had interfaces that allow us to use mobile content. There are mobile versions of websites. Most large organizations now would build their website so that it will resize and display suitably in mobile, using a range of technologies like HTML5 or XML and cascading style sheets. And we've got the growth of apps, so many organizations feeling that they can create something that is a personal piece of software installed by the user to interact with them. That slide again, just to remind you that we've got more cellular connections than any other connection. Dave Chaffee, who's a British academic who writes about the use of internet marketing, looking at the benefits to the customer of mobile, why we want to use our mobile to search the internet. that we have access to it without, away from a fixed location, wherever we are, and that the information it provides increasingly is based on the location we're in. So when we do searches on our mobile phone, what we see is results that relate to our location. There's the immediacy of it, that it's always on and always available. Privacy, the mobile phone is a more intimate object that we, as users, have a one-to-one connection with. Typically, we don't share our mobile phones, where something like a laptop or a tablet, other members of our family or other co-workers might access it. The mobile app allows for a high level of personalization. So compared with a web browser, where we have might have bookmarks or favorites that we return to, if we install apps on our phone, then that's creating a personal connection between us and the business or content provider we're interested in. And Chaffee lists security as one of the benefits as well. I might argue about that, but there is, perhaps from the perception of the consumer, there's a high level of security, that it's only you and your phone that knows what you're doing on the internet. I've got two tables that relate to how location is important for mobile. So location-based services, drawn on some sort of categorizations suggested by Dar and Vashi, suggested that there are a range of different types of services, things we look up, directories and content that list things like bars or restaurants or locations, services that we might be looking for. And there it does, the accuracy of the location doesn't need to be very tight. It's to do with the region we're in. If we're looking for a particular shop or an ATM or a parking spot or something like that, it's only got to be within a few dozen, tens of meters. Then we've got a lot of services that are tracking and navigational. This relates more to things like the Internet of Things. So if we're delivering parcels or goods, or trying to find a lost pet or a child, or find a vehicle that's been parked in a specific location, we have to have a high level of accuracy. Might have voice enabled. So if it's something like a navigation system in car, GPS, it would need to be able to interact with precise location and give feedback. We're seeing location-based emergency services, so the identification of where somebody who needs help from medical services, breakdown services of vehicle, and location-based advertising, which is the one I'll think about a little bit more in a minute in terms of Google. So presenting customized ads or coupons, vouchers, promotion or notifications based on where we are at the time as a consumer. Needs to have a fairly high, reasonably high level of accuracy if it's going to allow us to interact with individual offerings, for example, inside a shop. So one of the areas that Google's really working on at the moment is mapping inside spaces. So for sort of large department stores, Cortes Inglés or something, being able to say where you would go to find a particular good. So Dar and Vashi also suggest that one could analyse location-based services in terms of their orientation or what they do. So one might look at ones that are related to the person. So you as a user having something like Foursquare or Twitter as a way of saying, here I am, here's what I'm doing, or here's what I'm looking for. But also device-oriented applications that are just tracking the device and responding to where the phone is at any particular time. They suggest we might want to think about the difference between push and pull applications. So sometimes people are looking for something and they will pull, they will search, they will say, I want to know if there's a good bar within walking distance of where I am. But there are also services that are push, that will pop up an alert as a consumer walks into a shop. We'll say to them, we have an offer on a particular counter, or a particular department, or a particular service. So that would be push. There's the type of profiling that might take place. So direct and indirect profile, independing on what way the user wants to share their data, and the availability of the profile information. So companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter, part of the value that we might see that they are creating is that they are getting a very personal profile of each individual's users, preferences and interests. Some of that might be made available as a commercial offering for people who want to market, but the owner of the information will be the company that collects the data. So companies like Facebook are creating sort of marketing value by knowing a lot about their customers and then allowing third parties, people who want to advertise, access to some of that. Dara and Vashi also talk about the type of interaction, the rate, the mobility and the state of the interaction. So how people interact with the system, the nature of the information provided, whether it's static and dynamic, so whether the information being provided by the organisation changes over time, or whether it's just an offer presented. So it might, for example, if you had dynamic information available, you might change the offer depending on the weather or the climate. So if it starts raining, it's potentially it would be potentially possible to create a marketing message that said, you know, we've got somewhere you can sit down and have a cup of coffee until the rain finishes, or something like that. Dara and Vashi also talk about the source of the location information. So again, whether it's provided by the network or made available to third parties, and the accuracy of the location information. So that article is one of the most advanced I've seen in terms of breaking up location information into a lot of different categories. The next few slides are drawn from a presentation by Google on how they analyse American consumer usage of mobile internet. It's about 18 months old, so it's a little bit out of date. But and because it's created by Google, it has a marketing spin. Now, I take it that they are trying to emphasise the value of mobile as a way of reaching consumers. But it was a large survey. I think it was about 10,000. Let's see if it's got the number on there. It was a pretty big sample size that they took, and it was cross-generational. It wasn't a convenience sample. The sample was designed to reflect ownership of mobile phones, smartphones in America at that point. So it isn't just young people. And at the time the survey was taken, over half the users had browsed the internet on their phone in the last week. And because I think this is quite useful to think about because it's cross-generational. So this isn't only teenagers and students, but all generations, that over 40% had searched on their phones, and over a third had used an app, and about a fifth had watched a video. And in terms of the ways that people are using their mobile phone, the triggers, the biggest usage is to pass time when waiting, which I think we see as a truism already, that people who are waiting in any sort of downtime turn to their phone increasingly as a sort of intimate connection with the rest of the world. Over half of people saw it as a quick source of information, and nearly half said that it was a modern accessory, that they didn't want to be without it, that it was something that they felt of as part of their modern necessities. Three-quarters of respondents use their mobile phone while doing other things, consuming other forms of media. So over half watching TV. I've seen some UK survey figures for last year where this has increased. So a lot of people, when they're interacting with one form of content, like television or radio or music are using the internet via their phone as a second source of information, and perhaps as a way of sharing the experience, so tweeting what they're watching or updating their Facebook status in relation to content they're consuming. This, I would suggest, is open to skeptical interpretation because Google are selling advertising, but saying that people do, the vast majority of respondents do notice a mobile ad. Notice is not the same as necessarily like or respond to. But whether or not people are responding to mobile advertising, it does seem fairly demonstrable that people are using their mobile as part of their choices of consumption. So in terms of the process by which people go about making a purchase, those who are using smartphones, 60% are saying they talk to other people, or they visited social networking sites, or looked for recommendations, so looking for validation of their choice by what other people are doing. They might start off their research on a phone and then finish it off on a desktop computer, but a lot of people are searching at the point that they think, what should I choose, what should I buy? Nearly 70% used it in terms of when they're visiting a business, so when they're in a shop or making consumption choices, looking up information. And over half are actually making their purchase via the phone. So that's a very high level of mobile commerce penetration, according to Google. Got a couple of slides that I've put in there to emphasize the way that companies are encouraging consumers to use their apps. So for companies, organizations, there's a big value in moving consumers away from the website and onto the app, even though the cost of app development is quite high and the maintenance of app development is quite high. But the level of insight into the consumer behavior is much higher when a consumer uses an app. So here, Amazon, their mobile version of the site viewed on screen, the first thing that comes up is get the Amazon app. So there's a huge push to move the consumer to move onto the Amazon app. If you search for eBay on Google, or when I search for eBay on Google, the paid result is download the free eBay app. So eBay and Amazon spending money to try and push the consumers not just to use the mobile version of the website. And the mobile version of eBay works very well. It's got an optimized design for a mobile display. It's a specialized version of the website, but a pop-up appears when you log into eBay. Yeah, it did when at that point, encouraging the user to get the app. And I'll return to sort of some of the implications of why companies want us to use apps a bit further on in the lecture. I've got here some practitioner tips in terms of if one's looking at how to make the content that we display, the use of the website easy for the mobile visitors. So keeping user experience simple, making it quick and easy to find, detecting the handset, so being able to display a different version of the site depending on whether it's a large or a small screen, making sure that other media channels drive content to the site. So for example, in store, making it easy for customers to do price comparison and look at your site. So having QR codes, it's not on the slide, but increasingly stores are providing in-house Wi-Fi because they recognize that consumers are going to want to access mobile information while they're making their product choices. Using personalization, so trying to recognize what it is the consumer's looking for and responding to that, trying to encourage return visits, making payment options simple. So people don't want to enter credit card details on their mobile phone. They want to be able to use simple payment systems. Test and monitor. So the variations in handsets and the ways that mobile sites are displayed have put website management back to where it was in the early days of the internet. It used to be that different users using different versions of web browsers, the difference between using Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer had a big impact on the way websites looked. Now mobile means that there needs to be lots of testing because different handsets will display things differently, and monitoring the traffic in real time, so understanding how people are moving around and using the site. I've got a few slides now that I've taken from a biannual survey of UK households run by the Oxford Internet Institute. So it's part of Oxford University. It's a reputable and large survey of about 1,500 consumers, again normalised for the population. And I wanted to just sort of point out some of this is 2011, the 2013 data wasn't available yet, but showing growth of Wi-Fi, growth of mobile and tablet and cable TV for accessing the internet, the use of features on mobile phones, so things like sharing pictures and taking pictures growing very rapidly, and really the integration of the phone as the single sort of electronic device for games and music as well. I thought this was quite interesting in terms of what people think of as an important and reliable source of information. So next generation users are people who've been using the internet or mobile technologies for a number of years. First generation users are people who've only recently adopted the internet. And on some of the slides, we've got non and ex users. And so, for example, how many people trust the newspapers? Non-users trust newspapers much more highly than both next and first generation users. But in terms of would we trust the internet as a source of information, there's quite a marked difference between those who've been using the internet for a while and those who are new to use of the internet. So I think in terms of our attitudes towards whether we believe that this is an essential source of information, the longer that people use a technology, I'm generalising here, but it feels to me that the pattern we're seeing here particularly is the longer that people use the technology, the more likely they are to believe that that is the reliable source of information or an essential source of information. And that has implications, I think, for how we are going to relate to mobile in the future. In terms of attitudes towards technology, so our sort of belief and trust in it, these are three demographic slices: students, the employed and the retired, which probably also is a generational attitude. So 90% of students say that technology makes things better. Only 20% of retired people leave their mobile phone on when they're in bed at night, whereas about 64% when this survey was taken in 2011. When I show this slide, I always ask my students how many of them leave their mobile phone on at night, and it seems to be ubiquitous now. I mean, you've been using this slide for 2 years or something like that. Everybody leaves their mobile phone on at night. Well, I say that. Do you leave your mobile phones on at night? You turn it off?
It's on.
You have it on?
It's always on.
It's always on, yeah. And so that's interesting that you turn it off, because I don't find very many people who do anymore. So my feeling was that this slide, snapshot of 2011, that it's likely that in the next survey we'll see, sort of 80 or 90% probably. and some sort of technology fears and trusts that there's a marked difference between students and the elderly or the retired. There's some differences in gender. So in the very small sample we have here, there is some likelihood that the men are more likely to leave their phone on at night than the women, but I found this interesting, that in terms of turning off media to concentrate, so if you're trying to write an essay, men are slightly more likely to feel that they need to turn off things that might distract them, according to that snapshot of time. This is some analysis drawing on the same survey, but looking at that issue of trust growing through time, which I think is interesting in terms of how it helps us to think about where mobile will go. Let me remind myself of that. So the question was, how reliable would you relate information you found on the internet? And the percentage of people who said, I don't know whether I would consider it reliable, there's been a growth in those who do not use the internet. Between 2003 and 2009, more people in 2009 who are not using the internet say, I don't know if I'd find it reliable. So I see that as an indication of something like a separation in attitudes. But in 2009, if you've not got access to the internet in the UK, you've made a decision. It's because the internet is very, very ubiquitous and widely available. So those who are not using it probably are more inclined to say, I don't trust it, I don't think it's of interest. With past users, people who have had the internet and then have stopped using it, again, we've seen a growth in those who've said, I don't need the internet, I tried it, it wasn't useful for me. They're strongly of the opinion that the reliability of the information on the internet is not high. So I just think that there's something about how we feel about technology and whether we trust what we find there. And I think that when we try to understand what's going to happen, the growth of tablets is something that everybody is likely to have access to. So just a couple of headlines on the number of people in the UK who are using tablets, and particularly people who didn't have technology previously. So older members of families who get a tablet to access the internet. According to the Times newspaper, that means people think they'll read more news. I think this is my last slide, and this was, to do with what we get, what companies get from releasing apps and the amount of information that they can gain about their users. I'd like to point out that quite a lot of the apps here, even Justin Bieber hasn't got it, but a number of the apps may take a photograph or video of the user using the mobile phone, which I don't know if you did you know that your phone, that the apps that are on your phone are permitted to turn the camera on your phone on and off without you knowing it. I tend to find that audiences are surprised by that, my students. So that's a question. Did you know your phone is permitted, if you've got apps on it, to take photos without you using it? You did not know? No. Sven, did you?
I didn't know that it can do photos without authentication.
Because I think many people are surprised by that, and it's my final slide in terms of...
I know that people started to put some kind of thing over the cameras of their laptops.
Yes, because...
I think probably this is one of the reasons why.
Yeah, yes, because Adobe Flash for a while had something in the user agreement in that no one read, that said we can turn the camera on and off if we want. I think actually I'm going to turn the microphone off now because I've finished lecturing.